My heart was beating so loud I was sure Derek could hear it from across the room. I lay there in our bed, forcing my breathing to stay slow and steady, my eyes barely cracked open just enough to see him moving around in the darkness. It was 2:17 a.m., according to the red numbers on our alarm clock, and my husband was creeping around our bedroom wearing latex gloves and carrying a small black bag I had never seen before. 3 hours earlier, I had done something that terrified me more than anything I had ever done in my life. When Derek handed me my nightly cup of chamomile tea, the same tea he had been making for me every single night for the past month, I smiled and thanked him just like always. But this time, when he went to brush his teeth, I poured every last drop down the bathroom sink and rinsed the cup clean. Then I climbed into bed and waited. Now, watching him through my barely open eyelids, I knew I had been right to be suspicious. Derek thought I was unconscious, knocked out cold by whatever he had been putting in my tea. He moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, quiet but not worried about waking me up. That scared me more than anything. The whole nightmare had started 3 weeks ago, though I didn't realize it at the time. I just thought I was going through a rough patch with my sleep. Every morning I would wake up feeling like I had been hit by a truck, groggy and confused, sometimes finding myself in strange positions in bed. My pajamas would be twisted around my body in ways that didn't make sense, and I would have no memory of moving during the night. At first, I blamed it on stress. Derek had been traveling more for his job selling medical equipment, and I was working long hours on a big project for my graphic design business. When you work from home like I do, the days can blur together, and I thought maybe I was just pushing myself too hard. But then my sister Claire called me one Tuesday morning, and she sounded worried. "Anna, are you okay? You sounded really weird last night when we talked. Like you were drunk or something, but you said you hadn't been drinking." I didn't remember talking to Claire the night before. I didn't remember much of anything after drinking my tea and going to bed around 10 o'clock. That's when the first cold finger of fear touched my spine. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed that the strange, heavy sleep only happened on nights when Derek was home. When he was traveling for work, I slept normally and woke up refreshed. When he was home and made me my tea, I would fall into a deep, dreamless sleep and wake up feeling awful. The bruises were what really convinced me something was wrong. Small ones on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain. When I asked Derek about them, he would look concerned and suggest maybe I was sleepwalking and bumping into things. He even offered to take me to see a doctor, which made me feel guilty for suspecting him. What kind of wife suspects her husband of hurting her when he's trying to help? But the guilt wasn't enough to stop the growing fear in my chest. I started testing my theory in small ways. Some nights I would tell Derek I was too full for tea, or that my stomach was upset. On those nights, I slept fine. Other nights I would drink the tea, and I would wake up feeling drugged and disoriented. 2 weeks ago, I pretended to have a headache and went to bed early, before Derek could make my tea. I lay in the dark and listened to him moving around downstairs for over an hour. When he finally came to bed, he seemed agitated, checking his phone constantly and tossing and turning all night. That's when I knew for certain that Derek was putting something in my tea. My own husband was drugging me every night, and I had no idea why. The not knowing was almost worse than the fear. What was he doing to me while I was unconscious? Why was he doing it? How long had it been going on? The questions spun around in my head during the day while Derek was at work, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. I thought about confronting him, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he had been acting lately, more controlling and possessive than usual. He had started questioning me about where I went during the day, who I talked to, what I did while he was at work. He had also been encouraging me to cut back on my freelance clients, saying he made enough money to support us both and that I should focus on taking care of myself and our home. Looking back now, I could see he had been isolating me, making me dependent on him, preparing for something. But preparing for what? So instead of confronting him, I decided to catch him in the act. I needed to know what he was doing to me while I was unconscious. I needed proof of what was happening so I could figure out what to do next. Tonight was the night I would finally get my answers. As Derek moved closer to the bed, I forced every muscle in my body to stay relaxed and limp. I had practiced this earlier, lying in bed and trying to look unconscious while staying alert enough to see and hear everything around me. Derek was standing right next to my side of the bed now, looking down at me. Even in the darkness I could see he was holding something in his gloved hands. My skin crawled at the thought of those latex gloves touching me, but I stayed perfectly still. He reached toward me, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything but lie there and let him touch me. But I needed to know what he was doing. I needed to understand what my husband had been doing to me night after night, while I lay helpless and drugged in our bed. What happened next would change everything I thought I knew about the man I had married, the man I had trusted with my life, the man who had been slowly destroying me one cup of tea at a time. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I blamed myself. It was a Thursday morning in early October, and I woke up feeling like I had been swimming through thick mud all night. My mouth was dry, my head was pounding, and I felt dizzy when I tried to sit up. Derek was already dressed for work, standing at our bedroom mirror adjusting his tie. "You okay, honey?" he asked, turning to look at me with what seemed like genuine concern. "You look a little pale." I rubbed my temples, trying to clear the fog from my brain. "I think I'm coming down with something. I feel awful." Derek walked over and pressed his hand against my forehead. His touch made my skin crawl, though at the time I thought it was just because I felt sick, no fever. He said, "Maybe you're just stressed about that big project you're working on. You've been pushing yourself pretty hard lately." He was right about the project. I had been working long hours on a rebranding campaign for a local restaurant chain, and the deadline was approaching fast. It made sense that stress could be affecting my sleep. Derek kissed my forehead and told me to take it easy, maybe skip work for the day and rest. But the strange thing was, I felt fine by noon. The grogginess lifted, my headache disappeared, and I felt completely normal. I even managed to get several hours of good work done on my project. By evening, I had almost forgotten about feeling sick that morning. That night, Derek made me chamomile tea like he had been doing for the past few weeks. He said it would help me relax and sleep better, especially with all the stress I was under. The tea was sweet and soothing, and I always felt grateful that he was taking care of me. Within an hour of drinking it, I would feel drowsy and ready for bed. The pattern continued for over a week. I would wake up feeling terrible, spend the day gradually feeling better, drink my tea at night, and sleep deeply until morning when the cycle would start all over again. I mentioned it to Derek, and he suggested I might be working too many late nights or maybe I needed to change my diet. Everything changed the night Claire called. I was sitting in bed with my laptop, putting the finishing touches on some logo designs while Derek was in the shower. My phone rang, and Claire's name appeared on the screen. I was always happy to hear from my little sister, especially since we had been trying to stay in better touch after our parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. "Hey Claire," I answered, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder while I continued working. "Anna, thank God you're okay," Claire said, and she sounded really upset. "I was so worried after we talked last night. You sounded so strange, like you were drunk or on medication or something. I almost drove over to check on you." I stopped typing and gave the phone my full attention. "What do you mean? We didn't talk last night." There was a long pause. "Anna, we talked for almost an hour. You called me around 11:30. Don't you remember?" My blood went cold. I had no memory of calling Claire the night before. I remembered drinking my tea around 10 o'clock, feeling sleepy, and going to bed. The next thing I knew, it was morning and I was waking up with that familiar groggy feeling. I don't remember calling you," I said quietly, glancing toward the bathroom where I could still hear the shower running. "You were talking about Derek's work trip next week, and you kept repeating yourself. You told me the same story about your client meeting 3 different times. I asked if you had taken sleeping pills or something, and you just laughed and said you were fine. But you definitely weren't fine, Anna." After Claire hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, trying to remember anything about the previous night after drinking my tea. There was nothing. Just a blank space where several hours of my life should have been. That's when I started paying closer attention to the pattern. Over the next few days, I began keeping a journal, writing down how I felt each morning and trying to remember what had happened the night before. The results were disturbing. On nights when Derek was home and made me tea, I would have no memory of anything after drinking it, and I would wake up feeling drugged and disoriented. On nights when Derek was traveling for work, I slept normally and woke up refreshed. The difference was so obvious once I started tracking it that I couldn't believe I hadn't noticed before. I also started noticing other things. Sometimes I would wake up and my pajamas would be on backwards, or my hair would be messed up in a way that didn't make sense if I had just been sleeping. Once, I found my phone on Derek's side of the bed when I was sure I had left it on my nightstand. Another time, I woke up with my wedding ring on the wrong finger. The bruises started appearing around the same time. Small, round marks on my upper arms that looked like fingerprints. A bruise on my hip that was perfectly rectangular, like I had been pressed against the edge of something. When I asked Derek about them, he looked genuinely puzzled and concerned. "Maybe you're sleepwalking," he suggested. "My mom used to sleepwalk when she was stressed. She would bump into furniture and not remember it in the morning." It sounded reasonable, but something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. I had never sleepwalked before, not even as a child. And the bruises didn't look like the kind you would get from bumping into furniture. I started doing research online about sleep disorders and sleepwalking, but I also found myself reading about date rape drugs and their effects. The symptoms matched what I was experiencing perfectly: memory loss, grogginess, disorientation, and physical evidence of things happening while unconscious. But this was Derek, my husband of 4 years. The man who brought me coffee in bed every morning and rubbed my feet when I had a long day. The man who had held me while I cried after my parents died, and who had proposed to me on the beach where we had our first date. How could I even think such horrible things about him? I decided to test my theory in small ways. One night, I told Derek I had eaten too much dinner and my stomach was upset, so I didn't want any tea. He seemed disappointed, but said he understood. That night, I slept normally and woke up feeling fine. A few nights later, I said I had a headache and wanted to go to bed early, before our usual tea time. Derek offered to bring the tea to bed, but I said the smell might make my headache worse. Again, I slept normally. But Derek's behavior on those nights was strange. He seemed restless and agitated, checking his phone constantly and staying up much later than usual. On the nights when I did drink the tea, he would go to bed at the same time as me and seem much more relaxed. The final test came last week. I told Derek I was feeling nauseous and asked if he could make me some ginger tea instead of chamomile. He said we didn't have any ginger tea, and offered to run to the store to get some. I said not to bother, that I would just skip tea altogether that night. Derek insisted on going to the store. He was gone for over an hour, which seemed like a long time just to buy tea. When he came back, he had a box of ginger tea and seemed eager for me to try it. The tea tasted different from chamomile, but within an hour I felt the same drowsiness, and the next morning I woke up with the same groggy, drugged feeling. That's when I knew for certain that Derek was putting something in my tea, no matter what kind it was. My own husband was drugging me every single night, and I had no idea what he was doing to me while I was unconscious. The question that kept me awake during the day was simple and terrifying. What was Derek doing to me while I lay helpless in our bed? Tonight, I was finally going to find out. Derek set something down on the nightstand with a soft click, and I had to fight every instinct in my body to keep from flinching. Through my barely open eyelids, I could see him pulling out what looked like a small camera from his black bag. My heart was pounding so hard I was amazed he couldn't hear it, but I forced myself to keep breathing slowly and steadily like I was in a deep sleep. He positioned the camera on the dresser across from our bed, angling it toward me. The small red light blinked on and I realized he was recording whatever he was about to do. My stomach turned, but I stayed perfectly still. Derek moved back to the nightstand and pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight app but keeping it dim. In the soft glow, I could see him looking down at me with an expression I had never seen before. There was no love there, no tenderness. He was looking at me like I was an object, something he owned. He reached into the bag again and pulled out what looked like a small notebook. He flipped through a few pages, and I could see writing on them, though I couldn't make out the words from where I was lying. He seemed to be checking something, like he was following a plan. Then Derek did something that made my blood freeze. He pulled out a pair of scissors. I watched in horror as he carefully cut a small piece of fabric from the bottom of my pajama top, right at the hem where it wouldn't be noticeable. He placed the fabric in a small plastic bag and sealed it. Why would he want a piece of my clothing? What was he planning to do with it? Derek put the scissors and the bag back in his black bag, then moved closer to the bed. He started taking pictures of me with his phone, moving around to get different angles. The camera flash was off, but I could hear the soft click of the phone's camera each time he took a photo. But then he started moving my body. Derek lifted my arm and positioned it differently, then took more pictures. He moved my leg, adjusted how my head was lying on the pillow, even pulled at my pajama top to make it look more disheveled. Each time he moved me, he would take more photos from different angles. I had to use every ounce of willpower I had to stay limp and unresponsive. When he lifted my arm, I let it fall naturally when he released it. When he turned my head, I didn't resist or help him. I just lay there like a lifeless doll, while my husband posed me for his sick photographs. The worst part was how methodical he was about it. This wasn't something he was doing on impulse. Derek had clearly done this many times before. He knew exactly how to move me without waking someone who was actually unconscious. He knew which angles to photograph from, and how to make the pictures look the way he wanted them to look. After what felt like hours but was probably only about 20 minutes, Derek stopped taking pictures and pulled out his laptop. He set it up on the chair next to our bed and started transferring the photos from his phone. I could hear the soft sounds of him typing and clicking, and I realized he was uploading the pictures somewhere. While the photos were uploading, Derek opened his notebook again and started writing. I could see him glancing back and forth between me and the notebook, like he was taking notes about what he had done. The idea that he was keeping records of this made me feel sick. Then Derek's phone buzzed with a text message. He picked it up and read it, then typed back a response. A few seconds later, another message came in. Derek smiled as he read it, and that smile was the most terrifying thing I had seen all night. He typed another message, then showed his phone screen toward the camera that was still recording. I couldn't see what was on the screen, but Derek was clearly communicating with someone about what he was doing to me. More messages came in, and Derek kept responding. At one point, he took a few more pictures of me and sent them right away. Someone was giving him instructions about how to pose me, what pictures to take. This wasn't just Derek acting alone. He was working with other people. Derek closed his laptop and put his phone away, but he wasn't done yet. He pulled something else out of his bag that I couldn't quite see in the dim light. When he moved closer to me, I realized it was some kind of small brush or swab. He used it to collect something from my skin, then sealed the swab in another small plastic bag. He did this in several different places, always being careful not to wake me. I had no idea what he was collecting or why, but the clinical way he was doing it reminded me of how evidence is collected at crime scenes. Finally, Derek started packing up his equipment. He put the camera, the laptop, the bags, and the notebook back into his black bag. He took one last picture of me with his phone, then turned off the camera on the dresser. But before he left the room, Derek did something that almost made me gasp out loud. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, just like he did every morning when he left for work. "Sweet dreams, Anna," he whispered, and his voice was so gentle and loving that for a moment I almost doubted what I had just witnessed. Then he was gone, taking his black bag with him. I heard him go downstairs, and a few minutes later I heard the front door open and close quietly. Derek had left the house at almost 3 a.m, probably to meet whoever he had been texting with. I lay there in the darkness, my whole body shaking now that I was alone. What I had just witnessed was so much worse than anything I had imagined. Derek wasn't just drugging me. He was photographing me, collecting evidence from my body, keeping detailed records, and sharing everything with other people. I wasn't just his victim. I was his product. The sound of Derek's car pulling out of the driveway was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I waited another 10 minutes, counting every second, before I finally allowed myself to move. My whole body was stiff from lying so still for so long, and my hands were shaking as I sat up in bed. I had to move fast. Derek had said he was leaving for a 3-day business trip to Chicago, which meant I had maybe 6 hours before he realized he had forgotten something and came back home. He always forgot something when he traveled. The first thing I did was search our bedroom. I knew Derek kept his real laptop hidden somewhere because the one he had used last night wasn't the same one he used for work. I found it in a locked briefcase under our bed, but the lock was just a simple combination lock. I tried our anniversary date, and it clicked open immediately. Derek's laptop was still logged in, probably because he had been in such a hurry to leave. What I found on it made me sick to my stomach, but I forced myself to keep looking. I needed evidence of what he had been doing to me. There were hundreds of photos and videos, organized into folders by date. The oldest folder was labeled with a date from 8 months ago, which meant Derek had been doing this to me for much longer than I had realized. Some of the photos were of me sleeping normally, but others showed me posed in ways that made me feel violated and dirty. But the worst part was that I wasn't the only victim. There were folders with other women's names on them: Jennifer, Patricia, Michelle. At least 6 different women, all with dozens of photos and videos. Some of the folders went back years. I opened Jennifer's folder first. The photos showed a blonde woman who looked to be in her 30s, photographed in the same way Derek had been photographing me. But Jennifer's folder had a subfolder labeled Final Session that made my blood run cold. The photos in that folder showed the woman looking much thinner and sicker than in the earlier pictures. Patricia's folder had the same thing. So did Michelle's. All of the women looked healthy in their early photos, but the later pictures showed them looking weak and ill. What was Derek doing to these women? And what had happened to them? I found my answer in a document labeled Client Communications. Derek had been selling access to live video feeds of unconscious women to paying customers online. The customers could request specific poses, specific clothing, even specific things to be done to the women while they were drugged. Derek was running some kind of sick business, and I was his latest product. The document showed that Derek charged different rates for different services. Basic photo sessions were cheapest. Live video feeds cost more. And there was something called premium services that cost the most, but the document didn't explain what that meant. I found out when I opened Derek's email account. There were messages going back months between Derek and his customers, discussing what they wanted to see, and how much they were willing to pay for it. Some of the requests were so disturbing I had to stop reading. But the most terrifying thing I found was an email from just 2 days ago. A customer was asking about graduation services for me, and Derek had responded that I was almost ready, and that he would begin the final phase soon. I didn't know what the final phase meant, but based on what had happened to the other women, I knew it wasn't good. I copied everything I could find onto a flash drive, then started looking for Derek's phone records. He had been using a second phone for his business, and I found the bills hidden in his desk drawer. The phone records showed calls and texts to numbers all over the country, usually late at night. One number appeared more frequently than the others, with calls almost every day for the past month. I wrote down all the numbers, along with the dates and times of the calls. Then I found Derek's notebook, the same one he had been writing in the night before. It was hidden in his sock drawer, and reading it made me understand just how much danger I was in. Derek had been keeping detailed records of everything he did to me. He recorded what drugs he gave me, how long I stayed unconscious, how I reacted to different doses. He noted which poses and scenarios his customers requested most often. He even wrote down things like what I ate for dinner and how that affected how deeply I slept. But the most chilling entries were from the past week. Derek had written that several customers were asking about permanent access to me, and that he was considering transitioning to the final service level. He had also noted that I was becoming suspicious, and that he might need to accelerate the timeline. I realized that Derek had been planning to do something permanent to me, something that would give his customers complete access. Looking at what had happened to the other women, I was terrified that permanent meant I would disappear entirely. I took pictures of every page in the notebook with my phone, then put everything back exactly where I had found it. Derek couldn't know that I had discovered his secret, at least not yet. But I couldn't handle this alone. I needed help, and I needed it fast. Derek would be back in 3 days, and based on his notebook entries, I didn't think I had much time before he moved to whatever the final phase was. I called Claire first, but it went straight to voicemail. She was working a night shift at the hospital and wouldn't be available until morning. I left her a message asking her to call me as soon as possible, that it was an emergency. Then I thought about Mr. Peterson, our elderly neighbor. He was always sitting on his front porch watching the neighborhood. If Derek had been doing strange things at night, Mr. Peterson might have noticed. I looked out our bedroom window and saw a light on in Mr. Peterson's kitchen. It was almost 5 in the morning, but he was an early riser. Maybe he would be willing to talk to me. I had to take the chance. I was running out of time, and I needed someone to believe me about what Derek was doing. I grabbed the flash drive with all of Derek's files and headed for the front door. It was time to find out if I had any allies in this nightmare. Mr. Peterson answered his door in his bathrobe, looking concerned when he saw me standing on his porch at 5 in the morning. I must have looked terrible because he immediately invited me inside and offered me coffee. "Anna dear, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat at his kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to figure out how to explain what I had discovered. How do you tell someone that your husband has been drugging you and selling photos of your unconscious body to strangers online? "Mr. Peterson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you noticed anything strange happening at our house at night? Anything unusual with Derek?" Mr. Peterson's expression grew serious. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "Anna, I've been wondering when you were going to ask me that question." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I've been watching Derek come and go at all hours of the night for months now. Sometimes he leaves the house around 2 or 3 in the morning and doesn't come back until dawn. Other times, he has visitors who park down the street and walk to your house in the dark." I felt sick. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Derek told me you were having severe sleep problems, that you were taking strong medication that made you sleep very deeply. He said the doctor had advised him to check on you throughout the night, and sometimes he had to take you to emergency medical appointments. He asked me not to mention it to you because you were embarrassed about your condition." Derek had been covering his tracks, making sure that if anyone noticed his strange behavior, they would have an innocent explanation for it. But Mr. Peterson was sharper than Derek had given him credit for. "But something about his story never sat right with me," Mr. Peterson continued. "You've always seemed perfectly healthy to me, and I've never seen an ambulance or medical transport at your house. Plus, Derek's visitors didn't look like medical professionals." I pulled out my phone and showed Mr. Peterson some of the photos I had taken of Derek's notebook. His face went pale as he read the entries. "Dear God, Anna, we need to call the police right now." But when we called 911, the dispatcher seemed skeptical. A woman claiming her husband was drugging her and taking photos while she slept sounded like a domestic dispute, not an emergency. They said they would send an officer when one became available, but it might be several hours. "That's not good enough," Mr. Peterson said after I hung up. "Derek could come back at any time." That's when Claire finally called me back. I had never been so happy to hear my sister's voice in my life. "Anna, I got your message. What's going on?" I explained everything to Claire, from the drugged tea to what I had discovered on Derek's computer. Claire listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'm coming over right now," she finally said. "And I'm bringing someone with me." An hour later, Claire arrived with Detective Martinez, a friend of hers from the hospital who specialized in cases involving drugs and sexual assault. Detective Martinez took one look at the evidence I had gathered and immediately called for backup. "This is much bigger than just what Derek was doing to you," she explained, as we waited for the other officers to arrive. "Based on what you've found, he's been running a criminal enterprise for years. We're going to need to coordinate with other jurisdictions to track down all of his victims." The police set up surveillance on our house and traced the phone numbers I had found in Derek's records. Within hours, they had identified several other men in different states who were part of Derek's network. They were all being arrested simultaneously. But Derek was still out there, and he was supposed to come home that evening. Detective Martinez decided to set a trap. They would let Derek return home as planned, but the house would be surrounded by police officers. They wanted to catch him in the act of trying to drug me again, which would give them the strongest possible case against him. I was terrified, but I knew it was the only way to make sure Derek couldn't hurt me or anyone else ever again. That evening, I sat in our living room with a wire hidden under my shirt, waiting for Derek to come home. Police officers were positioned all around our house, but I still felt scared and alone. Derek walked through the front door at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying flowers and a box of my favorite chocolates. He kissed me hello and asked about my day, acting like the loving husband he had pretended to be for so long. "I missed you," he said. And for a moment I almost believed him. But when bedtime came and Derek went to the kitchen to make my tea, I knew the man I had married was gone forever. He brought me the cup with the same gentle smile he always wore, and I pretended to drink it just like I had 2 nights before. "Sweet dreams, honey," Derek said, kissing my forehead. 20 minutes later, when Derek thought I was unconscious, he went to get his black bag from the closet. But this time, when he turned on his camera and pulled out his notebook, Detective Martinez and 3 other officers burst through our bedroom door. Derek's face went white as the officers surrounded him. He looked at me lying in bed, then at the police, then back at me. That's when he realized I was awake, that I had been awake the whole time. "You knew," he whispered, and for the first time since I had known him, Derek looked genuinely afraid. "I knew," I said, sitting up in bed. "I knew everything." As the police led Derek away in handcuffs, he kept looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was disbelief, or maybe it was just the realization that his carefully constructed world had finally collapsed. The investigation that followed Derek's arrest uncovered a network of predators spanning multiple states. 17 women came forward as victims, and Derek was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I moved in with Claire while I recovered, both physically and emotionally. It took months of therapy to work through what Derek had done to me, but I slowly began to rebuild my life. The hardest part was learning to trust again, to believe that not everyone who claimed to love me was hiding something dark underneath. But with Claire's support and the help of other survivors I met through victim advocacy groups, I found my strength again. A year later, I started a non-profit organization to help other women who had been victims of similar crimes. I used my graphic design skills to create educational materials and websites that helped survivors connect with resources and support. Derek had tried to make me a victim, but instead, he had made me a survivor, and now I was using that survival to help others find their own strength and their own voices. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were getting less frequent. And when they did come, I reminded myself that Derek was locked away forever, that he could never hurt me or anyone else again. I had trusted my instincts, I had been brave enough to seek help, and I had survived. That was something Derek could never take away from me.